Hello, I'm not Dr. Allman. Hi, my name's Jeremiah Mavra-George, and I am a second-year MA in Apologetics and Evangelism student. But more importantly, I am the director of the Spiritual Life Board, and for the past year, I have had the wonderful privilege of serving this student body in their spiritual life, and I got to help put on this conference with my amazing team. I wanted to welcome and to especially thank you, Dr. Allman, for all you have done this week for our student body. If any of you have taken a class with him before, you already know what you were getting into when you came into this week and how you would be fed. Like I had that privilege, but you're even better than you are online. But I especially want to thank you because you have had such an impact on the student body in the past couple of days that you have been speaking, and I can already tell that you have left a huge impact on this student body. So we thank you so much for coming and for speaking at the chapel. So let's give it up for one final time for Dr. James Allman. Thank you.
My mother was the disciplinarian in the home, and she had a black belt in spanking. She probably had a master's degree and graduated with honors. The last spanking I remember getting from her, we had a little part Chihuahua, part Terrier dog who was as an independent, spirited an animal as you can imagine. If she thought you wanted her to come to you, she was going someplace else. But one day, Mother said those hated words, "Get the belt." I knew what was coming. And she took me in. I was probably in junior high. She took me in my bedroom and she started in. She always held me out at the end of her arm. Says you got a maximum arc on that belt. And so if you know, the velocity out here is more than the velocity down here. Boy, she was good. Well, Princess came running in, snarling and biting and snapping, and Mother and I both broke up into laughter, and it probably ruined the whole experience. But that's the last of the spankings I remember getting, but I deserved it a whole lot more than I got. And Mother was faithful, and I'm thankful for that. But the one time that I got in real trouble, I had a friend who would get mad and stalk off if he didn't get his way, and I'm a conciliatory kind of person, so I would try to get Lee to come back. "Oh, come on out, we'll do what you want to do." And Mother told me one day, she said, "Don't you do that anymore. He needs to learn. He can work with the group instead of always having to have his way." So Lee got mad and he stomped off, and I got on my bicycle and was going to go ride. And Mother was convinced I was going to go get Lee, so she took me in, gave me a spanking, sent me to the bathroom to take a bath because I'd been out playing, because mothers do that. Finally, I convinced her I was just going to go ride. I wasn't going after Lee. I didn't deserve that spanking, nor did I deserve to get into trouble for that situation. And you puzzle over those kinds of things. In the disciplinary work of God, what does it mean? Why does He discipline us? What does it mean? Mother was pretty hot sometimes when she spanked me. Loved me dearly. Anybody who knew her knew that. But she could get pretty angry because I was a teenager, you know. But sometimes it was a little different, or a little bit like having to undergo justice in a court. And you wonder precisely, what does God mean? What are we talking about when we talk about the disciplinary work of God? There's a distinction we need to start with And that distinction is the distinction between punishment and discipline. And it's a needful distinction, and you need to make that distinction in your own mind, especially if you're raising children or planning to raise children. You need to fix this distinction in your mind between punishment on the one hand, discipline on the other. Let's go to the extreme on the concept of punishment. Texas is a capital offense state, and so if you're convicted of a capital crime, you can be executed for that crime. Do we care whether the criminal repents or whether his life improves because of the penalty? No. It's of no consequence. When we send a convict to prison, we don't care, in a sense, the state doesn't care about the effect on him or on the effect on the family, because justice must be served. And so the outcome for the miscreant is of no consequence ultimately. What's critical, and this is a fundamental notion, folks, a state that will not protect itself against crime is a state that has forfeited its right to function. So we've got punishment. That's punishment. Discipline is fundamentally different. Discipline, the very word itself is derived from a Latin word that means to teach. The very notion of discipline, everything depends upon the outcome for the one who's done wrong. Everything. The whole purpose of it is to bring about change in the one undergoing discipline. I want my children to live through childhood and reach adulthood. Because kids do dumb things, yes? None of us have, but kids do dumb things. So I want them to survive. I want them not only to survive, but to flourish in adulthood. I want them to be mature adults who can have healthy relationships and a healthy life. And so discipline is a necessary thing. And folks, oh gosh, I've told you only about the spanking. Let me tell you about the really bad stuff. Oh, she was brutal. Dear me. You will weep when you hear this. She made me make the bed every morning. You're not weeping. You're laughing at my problems, my troubles. You're laughing at me and made me take out the trash every day. I had to dry the dishes at dinner every night. And she was a secretary at a high school, which meant she had all summer off. And she stayed up all night long, dreaming up chores for me to do all summer long. Everybody knows that summer is for play. But now looking back at it from the vantage point of these years, I think she was very faithful to discipline me. And she really did discipline me, not punish. But I wish she had been more faithful. Does that communicate to you? There are things that I got away with that I shouldn't have. There are aspects of my personality that I don't like and I wish were different, and her discipline could have contributed to that. But the point is, folks, the difference between punishment and discipline is the outcome for the evildoer. Punishment doesn't care what the outcome is. The only thing discipline is interested in is the outcome for the person undergoing discipline. Hebrews 12, 4-11 is the only passage I know. There may well be other passages, but I've never absolutely mastered the Bible, so I have not figured this out, but this is the only passage I know that spends a significant amount of time actually talking about discipline and what its goals are and what the outcomes are and so forth. But Hebrews 12, 4-11 is a passage that begins after a long context has been developed. And I have to take you back just briefly to chapter 10. And I want you to see this is an application section that begins in chapter 10 and goes through chapter 12, goes into chapter 12. It begins at 10:32. Remember the former days in which, once you were enlightened, you what? What do you have in your text? Endured. You endured a great trial of sufferings. Verse 35. Do not cast away your boldness, which has great reward. You have need of what? Endurance, so that by doing the will of God you may receive the promise. Then chapter 11 starts, and then he abandons that whole idea of endurance and starts talking about faith, yes? Or not. Faith that does not endure is not faith. So I just point out to you a couple of things here in chapter 11. If you look at verse 27, by faith he left Egypt, not fearing the wrath of the king, for he what? Endured as seeing him who was unseen. Or chapter 12, verse 1. Therefore, we too have so great a crowd of witnesses. Let's lay aside every weight and the sin that so easily besets us, and let us run with perseverance, endurance. It's the same word, basically, that we've been dealing with. With endurance, the race that's set before us, looking away to Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is sat down at the right hand of God. Consider him who endured. You get the kind of idea that chapter 10:32 begins a context that goes all the way through chapter 11 and then into chapter 12. Chapter 11 we've called the faith chapter, and when I was a boy in Sunday school, the teacher would ask, children, what is faith? And one of the kids, never I, because I would never raise my hand and speak, even here. I never spoke in class if I didn't have to. But one of the kids would raise, I know what it is, teacher. Hebrews 11:1, faith is the substance of things, help for the evidence of things not seen. And years later, I kept coming back to this, and I thought, what does this mean? A subjective movement of my soul is evidence and substance? That doesn't work. And I had to rethink what faith was and figure this out. But the point of this is Hebrews 11 is not defining faith. It's identifying one crucial aspect of faith, and that is that it trusts God to the point that it will endure through whatever God sends our way. And we have all kinds of examples of people. Look at the latter part of chapter 11. David Cotton, who was dean of students here, to the summer that I joined the faculty and he retired and left, and I wanted to be with him desperately. David Cotton said, if I ever write a book, I'd like to write it and title it From Hebrews 11. Let me give you the exact verse. Women received their dead back from, women received their dead back by resurrection. Others were beaten. And the King James has here, but others. And he said, I want to write a book on suffering, and I want to title it, But Others. It's the but others that are the crucial point here. There are two groups in this last part, 32 to 40. Two groups. One saw signal evidences of God's delivering power. Others suffered greatly. In the history of the church, which is the larger group, the first or the second? I hear it's the second. Far and away, it's the larger group. Is this a divine bait and switch? Tells us all the good things and then gives us just a little bit on suffering and then moves. No, it's not a divine bait and switch. It's telling us even the people who saw amazing evidences of God's power to deliver, even they had to endure. The point, folks, is that the chapter 11 is teaching us that what the faith that pleases God, the faith that pleases God, is one which endures through hardship. So we come to chapter 12, verse 4. We only mentioned that Jesus endured. Yes? I'm dealing with a concept. I've very ambitiously and arrogantly decided to write a commentary on the book of Hebrews. And I'm in chapter 2. And I was dealing yesterday, doing some writing on that here at the campus with chapter 2, verse 10. And Jesus was perfected. You think, perfected? What does that mean? The word perfect is a word that is used, for example, in Leviticus and in Exodus for ordination of the priests. And I'm toying with the idea of explaining that Jesus is ordained for his ministry as priest. But he's ordained through sufferings. Jesus underwent discipline for the Father. Why? Because he was bad? One of you says no. What do the rest of you say? I'm going to take him in and spank him because he... Why did Jesus undergo discipline? Folks, have you ever thought about what it meant for Jesus to grow up in this world? Think about it. He whose eyes are too pure to look on wickedness dealt with wickedness every moment of his incarnation, lived in it, wallowed in it. That alone would be suffering for such a person, would it not? And then he has to deal with the disciples. And then he has to deal with us. But in his life, he was ordained through suffering. Why did God the Father discipline Jesus? Well, look at verse 4 now. You have not resisted to the point of shedding blood in your struggle against sin, and you have forgotten the, what do you have word there? Comfort, exhortation, what do you have? Exhortation. The word can also be translated comfort. Depends on the context. You have forgotten the word of exhortation, which is addressed to you as sons. Ladies, this is not a sexist statement. You are given the same status that Jesus has. This starts in chapters 1 and 2 of Hebrews. In chapter 1, there is only one person who is son, but Jesus is, in chapter 2, bringing many sons to glory. Yes? So we are given the same status Jesus has. All of us together, equally, we have the same status Jesus has. So, where were we? Verse 4, verse 5, you have forgotten the encouragement that is addressed to you as to sons. My son, do not despise the chastening of the Lord or lose heart when you are rebuked by him. And then this verse 6 is so artistic, and it's so important that you see the artistry of it. The King James translates it this way, for whom the Lord loveth, he chasteneth, and scourgeth every son whom he receiveth. I want to point out to you there are 4 verbs in that verse, and they are arranged in an A-B-B-B, A-B-B-A pattern. That's called a chiasmus. That's a making of the letter chi. The idea is the first and fourth verbs have the same general field of meaning, and the second and third words have the same general field of meaning. What we read when we read this is scourges and chastens. Well, I'm so excited about that. I've been looking forward to scourging all my life, and I'm waiting for that to stop. But I love it because when it stops, it feels so good. But the point of the chiasmus is this. Look, the outside verbs, in a chiasmus, by the way, the context usually focuses on one or another of the pairs that are in the chiasmus. So notice that the outer verbs, the first and fourth, are love and acceptance. The loving acceptance of God surrounds his discipline and scourging of us. There is never an attitude of wrath toward us. It is his loving acceptance that he is expressing as he disciplines us. Some of the discipline is hard, so scourging is there. Some of the discipline is more benign, but it's always unwelcome to undisciplined people. But God surrounds his discipline in our life with his loving acceptance. And then he begins to explain it, verse 7 rather. You are enduring for discipline. God is treating you as sons. Did Jesus suffer? In the context, would that be Jesus' discipline? See, we think of discipline as always punitive. It's not always punitive, it's corrective. Folks, we treat Jesus oddly in our thinking. Well, he's Son of God, and he is. So, in the manger, there's the donkey, and there's the lamb, and here's Mary and Joseph, and he sits up in the manger and he says, "Good morning, Mother." "Hello, Joseph. I cannot call you Father, for I have one Father, even God. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for they shall see God." Luke tells us that he grew in wisdom and in stature and in favor with God. Why grow in wisdom? Because he's a child. Yes? Well, how do you learn wisdom? By eating ice cream and cake? You learn wisdom through going through hardship and learning from that hardship. Am I making sense? Jesus was disciplined. Why? Because he was bad? No, because he was Son. And if Jesus endures discipline because he is Son, as sons of God, we will endure a discipline, and it is the right and good thing that we should do. You are enduring for discipline. God is treating you as sons. For what son is there whom the Father does not discipline? Does that include Jesus? Yes. If you are without discipline, of which all have become participants, then you're illegitimate and not sons at all. Now, verses 9 through 12 are very important. 9 to 11 are very important. They give us three things that we can hold on to in the midst of suffering. First, formerly we had fathers of our flesh, and this verse is a little bit challenging for some of us. My father was in the home all the time, but an absent father, if that communicates to you. I had essentially no relationship with him. My wife grieves deeply at the anniversary of her father's death, and I don't. I envy her because I don't have a father whose death I am sorry about. When he died, she said to me, "Why aren't you grieving?" Her dad had just died 2 years before. She said, "You're not grieving. Why aren't you grieving?" I said, "My grief is over. I've grieved for 17 years. My grief is over." And I envy people who have the privilege of missing their fathers. I really do. That grief that some of you feel when you miss a father is really a very healthy thing. But some of you had worse fathers than I have, and this verse is going to be hard for some of you because there are fathers who do not discipline, they abuse. But this is talking about a good father. So, verse 9, formerly we had fathers of our flesh who disciplined us, and we honored them. If your father was a faithful father who disciplined you faithfully, do you still honor him? Then how shall we not submit ourselves to the Father of spirits and live? Not live for 30 or 40 years or 50 or 60. Live for eternity. His discipline is yielding for us fruit that will last forever. I'm excited about the judgment seat of Christ. For one of the things that all of us can expect in our faithful service to the Lord is that God is doing things that we have no idea about whatever our ministry is, He's doing things we have no idea about. So that generations down the line, God is bringing fruit for some of the labor that you do. And you'll get to see that at the judgment seat. I can't wait. This is going to be a glorious time. So we're going to live because we endure God's discipline. Verse 10, they disciplined it for a few days, 20 years. They disciplined us for a few days according as seemed best to them. But He for our profit, that we may share His holiness. It seems to be that if I'm not growing in, if I'm not enduring suffering, let me catch up here. I'm sorry about the PowerPoint. As I endure suffering, I'm growing toward His holiness. Does this make sense? Folks, parents have a goal for their children. It's not always a good one, but all parents have goals for their children. But that goal cannot last past death. Your Father in heaven has a goal for you that will not only transcend your death, but it'll transcend generations of people who are touched by the ministry that you gave at some point in life. And it will perhaps be even one of those kinds of places where you didn't even know you had done anything, but people are responding still generations down. I can't wait for that day. I have this rare privilege that has been given to me to function at Dallas Seminary for a time, and I don't know what God has done. And I'm glad, because if I knew, it might make me too proud. It's better that I find out at the judgment seat than now, because then I will know it was God's work through me anyway. So He's building His holiness in us through the disciplining work that He's doing in our lives. Let me catch up a little bit farther. So verse 10 there, we share His holiness. And finally, in verse 11, no discipline is for the present a thing of joy, but of sorrow. And I'm going to try to preserve the Greek word order here as much as possible, because Hebrews is really one of the most artistic books in the New Testament. The Greek here is just outstanding. He says, in the end, though, peaceable fruit to those who are exercised by it, it yields of righteousness. Do you notice that the word righteousness is right at the end of that verse? And the peaceable fruit is more or less at the beginning. It takes time. You don't grow up in 10 minutes, obviously. You don't grow up in 10 years. Folks, it takes about a day or two. According to the Bible, a blade of grass matures in a day and is gone the next day. Yes? Right? Isaiah 40. A dog takes about 3 years to mature. A human takes 20 or 30 years to mature, fully. Yes? Does that mean that we're worse than dogs? Or is it that the higher the status, the longer the maturation process takes? And it's taken me, the Lord saved me, I'm 74. He saved me 67 years ago. And now I'm the spiritual giant that you see standing before you. He saved me 67 years ago. And it's taken 67 years and a lot of sorrow and a lot of tears and a lot of struggles to get where I am today. But I had to learn, because of being a perfectionist, the Alcoholics Anonymous prayer. Oh Lord, I'm not what I ought to be. Oh Lord, I'm not what I want to be. But thank you, Lord, I'm not what I used to be. I'm so thankful to be on this end of that process rather than someplace else. But I know there's still so much in me left that needs to mature and grow up, and just simply grow up. No discipline for the present is a thing of joy but of sorrow, but finally it yields the peaceable fruit of righteousness to those who have been exercised by it. And the word exercise is the right word. It's the word that we get gymnasium from in Greek. In a gymnasium, you put yourself through pain to achieve a goal. Is that true? All right? And if you'll do that for simply physical health, what's it going to take for spiritual health, which is a whole different order of reality? So don't lose heart. There is hope for you. God is not leaving you alone. He is bringing discipline into your life. It's sorrowful, but He's bringing it into your life not because you've been bad. Do you know that? Notice that there is not a word in this passage about disciplining us because we're bad. He disciplines us because we are sons. Then folks, it's not a hopeless thing that you're undergoing the discipline of God. It is a profoundly hopeful thing that you are being disciplined by God. Stephen Lawson said, trials and tribulations are not an elective class in the Christian life, but a required course. But it's a required course unlike any required course at Dallas Seminary. It's one that you love when you understand what it's doing. When you understand that God's purpose in you is to make you like Jesus. Brothers and sisters, there's hope in the disciplining hand of God. He's doing it because He loves you and welcomes you into His family. You are His, and He's going to make you like His Son. Let's close with prayer. Father, I don't like discipline. And you know how much I dislike discipline. I don't want it. Thank you that you've been faithful to discipline me in so many other ways. Thank you for what you have accomplished so far. And with old age in my life now, I know that hard times are coming, both for my wife and for me. And sufferings are ahead. But Father, teach me in these days to welcome them as your discipline, to hold on to a loving Father who has not abandoned His love, has not abandoned His child. Let me live as a child, faithful, loving, valuing my Father and His work in my life. And what I pray for myself, I pray for these who are gathered here. You are good beyond our capacity to understand. Good is too weak a word. But you are good beyond our capacity to understand. And even in the darkest hours of our nights, when the sun is shining but there is darkness within, even in such times, that is your disciplining work. And you're working mercifully in us, not to leave us in our sin, but to develop us toward the righteousness and holiness of Jesus. With that hope in mind, Father, hold us fast, whatever your providence. For Jesus' sake we pray. Amen.